Hey everyone, Mr. Martin's IB bio class, right? Welcome. We're going to do a deep dive into conservation of biodiversity.
Yeah, it's going to be quite a deep dive, a lot of really fascinating material to cover.
Yeah, for sure. And you guys are probably already pretty familiar with this from class, but
Right.
we're going to go even further today.
Yeah, I think it's one of those topics that's always good to revisit because it's so multifaceted
Absolutely.
and there's so much new research coming out all the time.
For sure. And when we say biodiversity, we're not just talking about counting animals in a forest.
No, it's much broader than that.
It's kind of like a whole web of life.
Exactly. It's about the variety of life on Earth at all levels.
Yeah, so like from tiny bacteria to huge ecosystems.
Right. Think about the different ecosystems you've learned about: rainforests, deserts, coral reefs. Each one is like a unique world.
And all those ecosystems are teeming with different species, right?
Absolutely. And that's what we call species diversity, the number of different species in a given area.
And then there's also genetic diversity, right?
Right.
So like within a species.
Yeah, like think about all the different breeds of dogs or varieties of apples. That's genetic diversity in action.
Yeah, it's like the variation within a species.
Precisely. And all of this ecosystem, species, genes, it's all interconnected.
It's like a big puzzle where every piece is important.
Exactly. And we're only just beginning to understand how all the pieces fit together.
It's kind of mind-blowing to think about how much we still don't know about all the life out there.
Well, that's what makes it so exciting, right? There's always something new to discover.
For sure, but there's also a problem, right? We're losing biodiversity at an alarming rate.
Yeah, we're facing what scientists are calling the sixth mass extinction.
And unlike the one that wiped out the dinosaurs, this one's driven by us.
Exactly. Human activities are the primary cause.
So how do scientists even measure biodiversity loss? Like, how do they know it's happening?
Well, there are a few key ways they track it. One is by looking at species richness.
Okay, so that's just the number of different species in an area.
Exactly. And another important factor is species evenness.
Evenness.
Yeah, it's about how evenly distributed individuals are among the different species in an ecosystem.
Okay, so like if one species dominates, that's not good.
Right. Imagine a forest with 100 trees, but 90 of them are all the same species. That's not very diverse.
So it's not just about how many species there are, but also how balanced the populations are.
Exactly. And there's a way to quantify this using something called the Simpson's Diversity Index.
Okay, and this index helps scientists compare different areas and see which ones are more diverse.
Precisely. A higher index value means greater biodiversity.
So I was reading this IPBES report, and it paints a pretty bleak picture.
Yeah, it's definitely a wake-up call.
They say we've lost something like 85% of wetlands since the 18th century.
That's a staggering number, and it highlights the scale of the problem we're facing.
It's hard to even fathom what that kind of loss means for all the species that depend on wetlands.
Yeah, it's a ripple effect, right?
Yeah.
One loss leads to another.
And at the heart of it all is human population growth, right? More people means more demand for resources.
Exactly. As our population grows, so does our impact on the planet.
And that impact is manifesting in these 5 main drivers of biodiversity loss, right? Overexploitation, habitat loss, pollution, invasive species, and climate change.
Right, those are the five.
Let's break them down one by one. Starting with overexploitation, what does that actually look like?
It's basically taking more from nature than it can replenish.
Okay, so like overfishing.
Yeah, classic example. Think about the Atlantic bluefin tuna. Highly prized for sushi, but their populations have plummeted due to overfishing.
Yeah, it's like we're eating them faster than they can reproduce.
Exactly. And it's not just fish. It's happening with all sorts of species: timber, plants, even animals hunted for their parts.
So it's about unsustainable harvesting, taking too much too fast.
Precisely. And it's often driven by economic factors like demand for certain products.
And this ties into habitat loss, right? We're clearing land for agriculture, urban development, all sorts of things.
Exactly. Deforestation is a huge problem, particularly in tropical rainforests, which are home to so much biodiversity.
And it's not just forests. It's wetlands, grasslands, all types of habitats being converted for human use.
And as we fragment these habitats, we're creating isolated patches, which makes it harder for species to survive.
Yeah, it's like we're cutting off their lifelines.
There's this really striking example of this, the Aral Sea. Have you heard of it?
I've heard the name, but I don't know much about it.
It was once the 4th largest lake in the world, but it shrunk dramatically over the past few decades.
What happened?
They diverted water from the rivers that fed it for irrigation.
So they basically drained the lake to grow crops.
Essentially, yes. And the consequences have been devastating.
Like what?
The ecosystem collapsed, the fishing industry vanished. Dust storms from the exposed lake bed are causing health problems.
Wow. That's a real cautionary tale.
It is. It shows what can happen when we disrupt natural systems without thinking about the long-term consequences.
Okay, so we've got overexploitation, habitat loss. What about pollution? That seems like a harder one to tackle.
It is. It's often less visible than the other threats, but just as damaging.
Like what kind of pollution are we talking about?
Well, there's air pollution, water pollution, soil contamination, all sorts of things.
So, like chemicals from factories and farms.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Pesticides, fertilizers, industrial waste, they all end up in the environment and harm wildlife.
And what about plastic? That seems to be everywhere these days.
Yeah, plastic pollution is a huge problem. It's choking our oceans, harming marine life, and even ending up in our food chain.
Okay, so pollution's a big one. What about invasive species? I know those can cause a lot of trouble.
They can. When a species is introduced to an area where it doesn't naturally belong, it can sometimes outcompete native species.
And that throws the whole ecosystem off balance, right?
Exactly. They can disrupt food webs, introduce diseases, even alter habitats.
There was that thing about the cane toads in Australia, right?
Oh, yeah. They were introduced to control pests, but ended up becoming a major pest themselves.
I remember seeing pictures. They're huge.
They are. And they have toxic skin glands, which makes them dangerous to native predators.
So it's like a domino effect, right?
Yeah.
One change leads to another.
And sometimes these changes are irreversible.
Okay, so we've got 4 out of 5. Overexploitation, habitat loss, pollution, and invasive species. What about climate change? Where does that fit in?
Climate change is like a threat multiplier. It exacerbates all the other threats we've discussed.
So,
Well, as temperatures rise and weather patterns shift, it puts additional stress on ecosystems.
so it's like adding fuel to the fire.
Exactly. Species are already struggling to cope with habitat loss and pollution, and now they have to deal with the changing climate as well.
So it's like a perfect storm of threats.
In a way, yes. And the impacts are being felt all over the world, from melting glaciers to more frequent and severe droughts and floods.
So it's not just a problem for the future, it's happening right now.
Absolutely. And the longer we wait to address it, the worse it's going to get.
So we talked about all these threats to biodiversity. It's kind of a lot to take in.
It is. But the good news is that people are working hard to address these challenges.
That's good to hear, because it can feel kind of overwhelming, you know?
Yeah, I get that. It's easy to feel helpless. But there's actually a lot happening on the conservation front.
Okay, so what's being done to protect biodiversity? What are some of the solutions?
Well, one of the most important things is protecting habitats.
Okay, that makes sense. If we want to save species, we need to save the places where they live.
Exactly. So setting aside land for national parks, wildlife refuges, and other protected areas is crucial.
But that only protects certain areas, right? What about the rest of the world?
Well, that's where sustainable practices come in.
Okay, so like what? What are some examples of sustainable practices?
Well, in agriculture, it's things like reducing pesticide use, practicing crop rotation, and planting cover crops.
So it's about farming in a way that doesn't harm the environment.
Exactly.
Mm.
And in forestry, it's about selective logging and reforestation.
So instead of clear-cutting entire forests, we're being more careful about which trees we harvest.
Right. And we're also planting trees to replace the ones we cut down.
And what about the oceans? We talked about overfishing being a big problem.
Yeah, well, there are a few things we can do to address that. One is to establish marine protected areas.
Okay, so those are like underwater national parks.
Exactly. They help protect fish populations and their habitats.
And what about fishing quotas? Do those help?
They can if they're set at sustainable levels.
Mm.
The idea is to limit how much fish can be caught so that populations have a chance to recover.
So it's all about finding a balance, right, between human needs and the needs of the ecosystem.
Precisely. And it's not just about government regulations and big industries. Individuals can make a difference, too.
How so? What can we do in our everyday lives?
Well, one of the biggest things is to reduce our consumption.
Okay, so buy less stuff.
Exactly. And when you do buy things, try to choose sustainable options.
Like products made from recycled materials or from companies that are committed to environmental protection.
Right. And think about your diet, too. Eating less meat can have a big impact.
Why is that?
Producing meat requires a lot of resources like land, water, and energy.
So by eating less meat, we're reducing our environmental footprint.
Exactly. And there are also things you can do around the house to be more eco-friendly,
Like what?
like conserving water, using energy-efficient appliances, and recycling.
Those are all good things to do. But it can feel kind of small, you know? Like, does it really make a difference?
It does. Every little bit helps. And when we all make changes, it adds up.
Okay, so it's about collective action, right? We all need to do our part.
Absolutely. And we need to hold our leaders accountable.
So vote for politicians who support environmental protection.
Exactly. And speak out against policies that harm biodiversity.
So it's not just about what we do as individuals, it's also about advocating for change at a larger scale.
Right. And that's where education and awareness come in.
Okay, so the more people know about the biodiversity crisis, the more likely they are to take action.
Exactly. We need to raise awareness about the importance of biodiversity and the threats it faces.
And how do we do that?
Well, there are a lot of ways we can talk to our friends and family. We can share information on social media. We can support conservation organizations.
So it's about spreading the word and getting people engaged.
Precisely. And it's also about inspiring hope.
Because it can be easy to get discouraged, right?
Yeah, but it's important to remember that there are solutions and that people are working hard to make a difference.
So it's not a lost cause. There's still time to act.
Absolutely. And the more people who get involved, the better our chances of success.
I like that. It makes me feel more optimistic.
Day two, we have to believe that change is possible.
So what are some of the most promising solutions out there? What's giving you hope?
Well, one thing that's really exciting is the growing field of restoration ecology.
What's that?
It's about actively restoring degraded ecosystems.
So like planting trees in areas that have been deforested.
Yeah, and also restoring wetlands, grasslands, and other habitats.
So it's about bringing back what's been lost.
Exactly. And it's amazing to see what can be achieved with a little bit of effort.
Can you give us an example?
Sure. Have you heard of the Yellowstone to Yukon Conservation Initiative?
I don't think so.
It's a group that's working to create a vast network of protected areas stretching from Yellowstone National Park in the U.S. all the way up to the Yukon Territory in Canada.
Wow, that's ambitious.
It is, but it's also incredibly important. The goal is to create wildlife corridors that allow animals to move freely between protected areas.
So it's about connecting fragmented habitats.
Exactly. And it's not just about protecting individual species, it's about restoring entire ecosystems.
It's like stitching the landscape back together.
That's a great way to put it, and it's a reminder that we're all interconnected.
Yeah, we're part of this web of life and we need to protect it.
Exactly, and that's what gives me hope. There are so many people working to make a difference, and I believe that together we can turn things around.
So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from the science of biodiversity to the threats it faces and the amazing work being done to protect it.
Yeah, it's been a really fascinating journey, and I hope it's left you feeling inspired.
Me too. I know I've learned a lot. And I think it's really important to remember that this isn't just some abstract scientific concept.
Right, biodiversity affects all of us. It's the foundation of our food systems, our clean water, our health, even our culture.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
woven into every aspect of our lives. So protecting it isn't just about saving some cute animals. It's about safeguarding our own future.
That's such a crucial point, and I think it's something that often gets lost in the conversation.
Yeah, we tend to focus on the doom and gloom, the extinctions, the habitat loss.
Right. But it's equally important to highlight the solutions, the success stories, the people who are making a difference.
Because that's what gives us hope, right? Knowing that there are things we can do to turn things around.
Absolutely. We can't afford to be paralyzed by despair. We have to channel that energy into action.
Okay, so let's talk about action. What can we do as individuals to protect biodiversity? Where do we even begin?
Well, I think the first step is to simply become more aware. Pay attention to the world around you. Learn about the plants and animals in your local area. Think about the choices you make and how they impact the environment.
So it starts with education, right?
Exactly. And education isn't just about reading books and watching documentaries. It's about getting out there and experiencing nature firsthand.
Okay, so go for hikes, visit parks, get your hands dirty.
Exactly. The more connected we feel to nature, the more likely we are to want to protect it.
And what about making changes in our daily lives? What are some simple things we can do to reduce our impact?
Well, one of the biggest things is to reduce our consumption.
Yeah.
Buy less stuff, choose durable products, repair things instead of throwing them away.
So it's about being more mindful consumers.
Exactly. And think about your diet, too. Eating less meat can have a big impact.
We talked about that earlier, right? Because meat production is resource intensive.
Yeah, it takes a lot of land, water, and energy to produce meat. So even reducing your meat consumption by a little bit can make a difference.
And what about transportation?
That's another big one. Try to walk, bike, or take public transportation whenever possible. If you have to drive, choose a fuel-efficient vehicle.
So it's about reducing our carbon footprint.
Exactly. And there are also things you can do around the house to be more eco-friendly, conserve water, use energy-efficient appliances, compost your food scraps.
Those are all great tips.
Yeah.
And they're things we can all do, regardless of our age or income.
Right. And the more people who make these changes, the bigger the impact will be.
Okay, so we've talked about individual actions. What about collective action? What can we do as a community to protect biodiversity?
Well, one of the most important things is to support conservation organizations.
Okay, so donate money, volunteer your time, spread the word about their work.
Exactly. These organizations are on the front lines of conservation, and they need our support.
And what about advocating for change at a policy level?
That's crucial, too. Contact your elected officials, let them know that you care about biodiversity and that you want them to prioritize environmental protection.
So vote for candidates who support strong environmental policies.
Absolutely. And hold them
Excellent.
accountable once they're in office.
And what about getting involved in citizen science projects? We talked about those earlier, right?
Yeah, citizen science is a great way to contribute to real scientific research and make a difference.
There are all sorts of projects out there. You can monitor bird populations, track invasive species, collect data on water quality.
And the best part is that you don't need to be a scientist to participate.
So it's a great way to learn something new and contribute to a good cause.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that we all have a role to play in protecting biodiversity.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today, from the science of biodiversity to the threats it faces and the solutions we can all be part of. What's the key takeaway you want listeners to leave with?
I think the most important thing is to remember that we're not powerless. We can all make a difference. No matter how small our actions may seem, they all add up.
So it's about having hope, right? Hope that we can turn things around.
Exactly. We have to believe that a better future is possible, a future where biodiversity thrives and humans live in harmony with nature.
And that's a future worth fighting for.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive. And to all of you listening, we hope you're feeling inspired to take action. Remember, the future of biodiversity is in our hands.